The key that wouldn't turn. It was one of those quiet Saturday mornings that retirees dream about. The kind of morning when the air is still, the sprinklers hum softly, and the world feels calm for a few precious hours. I was halfway through my coffee, enjoying the warmth on my porch, when I noticed her, Karen, from across the street. Clipboard in one hand, a lanyard swinging from her neck, the self-proclaimed HOA Vice President of Security. I should have known the day wouldn't stay quiet. Karen was inspecting mailboxes again, pretending she was some kind of neighborhood sheriff. She'd been on a mission ever since our HOA installed those new community locks. She claimed to have the master key, a universal pass to ensure compliance. The rest of us laughed it off, but it wasn't funny anymore, not when she started testing her key on our homes. A few months back, she'd tried my neighbor's door, by accident. Then the Wilsons'. Then ours. Each time, she claimed she was just checking security. The HOA board let her off with warnings, brushing it aside as her being a little too dedicated. But I knew better. That morning, as I trimmed the hedges, I saw her head toward my porch again. My son's old truck sat in the driveway. He was home for the weekend. He doesn't visit much since joining the police. He'd left his badge and gear bag on the kitchen counter, getting some rest after a long shift. Karen reached my front step. I stayed quiet, hidden behind the hedge. She bent over, inserted her master key into my lock, and twisted. Nothing. She tried again, jiggling it aggressively. Then she knocked on the door like she owned the place. The lock jammed. She cursed under her breath and pulled out her phone. I could hear snippets, something about homeowner noncompliance and reporting suspicious modifications. Within minutes, her voice turned shrill. Then, unbelievably, she called the cop. Apparently, she told dispatch that I had tampered with HOA security property. I stepped out from behind the hedge, just in time to see her pacing my porch, phone pressed to her ear, furious that her master key didn't work. My coffee went cold in my hand. 4 years we'd tolerated her nonsense. Her late-night patrols, her constant citations, her obsession with rules no one remembered voting for. But this was different. This was her trying to break into my home, and now she had involved the police. By the time the squad car rolled up, she was already waving her clipboard like a sword. I stood still, calm, as the officer approached. But then, the front door opened. My son stepped out, his hair still messy, but his expression sharp and unmistakable. In one hand, he held his badge. Karen froze. For the first time since she'd moved into the neighborhood, she was speechless. My son's voice was low, calm, but firm. Karen's face drained of color. The officer who arrived recognized him immediately and gave a respectful nod. Karen began stammering, trying to twist her story, claiming it was just a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The sight of that badge, the one she'd mocked before, saying rules are rules, even for officers, had finally shut her down. She took a step back, realizing she'd crossed a line she couldn't explain away. The officer took her statement, but it was clear who was in the wrong. Still, she insisted she had authorization. My son calmly explained that unless she had a warrant or written HOA order, she had no legal right to attempt entry. The officer agreed. Karen stormed off, muttering something about calling the board. The flashing lights faded and peace returned for now. But I knew this wasn't over. That night, while closing the curtains, I noticed her window across the street still glowing. The silhouette of her figure moved restlessly back and forth, pacing like a storm gathering strength. Something told me she wasn't done. The next morning, a letter from the HOA was taped to my door. It said, "You are in violation of HOA compliance protocol for non-standard lock installation. Please respond within 48 hours to avoid fines or further action." I laughed, but deep down, I felt the weight of what was coming. Karen had declared war. And this time, she wasn't hiding behind her clipboard. The retaliation of Karen. The following week felt like walking through enemy territory. Every morning, I'd find something new, A notice on my mailbox, a warning taped to the garbage bin, or a printed, HOA violation, slip stuck under my windshield wiper. Each one carried the same signature. K. Anderson, Vice President of Compliance. It was almost comical at first. She accused me of having non-regulation grass height, decorative lighting after curfew, and even unauthorized use of porch furniture. I half expected the next letter to fine me for breathing too loudly on community property. But what started as a nuisance soon turned serious. Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting. Every homeowner received a notice in their mailbox, an official summons to address repeated violations by lot number 24. My lot. My name. My address. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I knew what it was. A public ambush disguised as a community meeting. By that evening, the neighborhood group chat was alive with rumors. Karen had apparently shown photos of my front door, claiming I'd replaced the HOA-approved lock with unregistered hardware that jeopardized community safety. She told everyone that my son had intimidated an HOA officer with a police impersonation badge. That was the part that stung the most. The next morning, I walked out to retrieve my newspaper and saw her standing by her mailbox, watching me. That smug expression, clipboard clutched tight, told me everything. She thought she'd won. But there was something Karen didn't know. My son, though young, wasn't just any officer. He worked in internal affairs, the branch that investigates misuse of authority. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. When I told him about the meeting and the false claims, his calm reply was simple: document everything. So I did. Every notice, every message, every warning, I kept it all. I even installed a small camera by the front door, angled perfectly toward the porch. 2 days later, that camera caught something unbelievable. At 11:47 p.m., Karen crept onto my porch again. She looked around, then pulled a small metallic object from her jacket, another key. She tried it in my lock, once, twice, 3 times. When it failed again, she kicked the door lightly, muttering something I couldn't make out. Then she took photos of my house, my windows, my son's car. And just before leaving, she stuck another notice to the door. Final warning: noncompliance may result in HOA escalation. The next morning, I sent the footage to the local police department, through official channels, under my son's guidance. Karen must have realized something was happening, because by noon, she was in full panic mode. She stormed around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, ranting about how the HOA's authority was under attack. She even tried to convince a few neighbors that I'd hacked her master key system. But the tide was turning. Neighbors who once ignored her started whispering about her strange behavior. A few even admitted she'd tried their doors too. One woman mentioned Karen showing up uninvited for an inspection when her husband wasn't home. By evening, half the community was questioning her sanity. Still, Karen wasn't done. That same night, a new letter arrived, not taped this time, but slid under the door. It read, "Effective immediately, your HOA membership privileges are suspended pending investigation of your misconduct. You are prohibited from using community facilities." That was her final move: isolation. She wanted to make me a pariah. When my son came home that weekend, I showed him everything: the letters, the footage, the logs. He didn't say much. Just nodded, then opened his laptop. What happened next felt like justice with precision. He filed a formal complaint to the County Housing Board, attaching every document and every second of footage. Karen had violated at least 4 state statutes: illegal entry attempts, harassment, misuse of HOA authority, and falsified reporting. It was all there, in black and white. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Until I woke up to red and blue lights outside my window. Karen's house was surrounded. She stood on her porch, robe on, hands raised slightly in confusion as officers spoke to her calmly. The neighborhood watched from their lawns. No one said a word. She wasn't arrested. Not yet, but it was clear. Something official had begun. The next morning, the HOA president called me personally, his voice trembling. He apologized for any inconvenience and said Karen had been temporarily suspended pending internal review. But I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't just vanish quietly. They wait, they fume, and they plot their return. As I hung up the phone, I saw her blinds twitch from across the street. Her eyes met mine for a split second, and in that brief look, I saw something unsettling, not fear, not regret, but defiance. The badge and the boardroom. A week later, the HOA called for one last emergency meeting. The air was heavy, the kind that carries whispers long before words are spoken. Every chair in the clubhouse was filled. Karen sat at the front, face pale but posture rigid, clutching her binder like a shield. The president began reading the report filed against her. The footage, the false citations, the illegal lock attempts. Each accusation struck like a hammer. Karen tried to interrupt, insisting it was all taken out of context, but no one came to her defense. The same neighbors she'd bullied for years now avoided her eyes. Then the door opened. My son walked in wearing his formal uniform. The room went silent. He placed a file on the table, official documentation from the county housing board. Inside were verified complaints from multiple residents. Karen's pattern of harassment was now a matter of record. The president read the verdict aloud. Karen was permanently removed from the HOA board, fined for trespassing, and banned from holding any future position in neighborhood governance. Her master key privileges were revoked immediately. For once, she had no words. Her power had evaporated before everyone's eyes. The clipboard slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a hollow sound that echoed through the room. As she left the meeting, she avoided my gaze. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood through fear now walked out under the weight of her own arrogance. In the days that followed, peace returned. No more notices, no more citations, no more unwanted inspections. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer, like the air after a long storm finally clears. One evening, as the sun set behind the houses, my son joined me on the porch. The lake shimmered softly in the distance, and for the first time in months, the world felt right again. He glanced at the old door lock and smiled. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "you don't need to fight back with anger. Just truth." I nodded, watching the calm street before us. Karen's house remained dark, her curtains drawn. Maybe she'd learned her lesson. Maybe she hadn't. But either way, the neighborhood had changed, not because of punishment but because someone finally stood up and said enough. And with that, the story of Karen and her master key finally ended where it began. In silence.